I'm neither your god, nor am I your savior. I'm merely the Human Reaper, and welcome my fellow inhabitants of the time to the first ever episode of Reaper Reviews. A series one show where I'm going to be taking an anime or a video game, and as the name suggests, review it. Today I'm going to be taking a look at an anime called No Game No Life, a 12-episode anime series produced by Madhouse Studios and aired during the spring 2014 anime season. So without further ado, let us begin. The story of NGNL is centered on Sora and Shiro, two neat siblings whose combined skill in video games, and just games in general, are capable of rivaling that of God. Literally. But more on that a bit later. So these two siblings refer to themselves as Blank and live by one policy. Blank never loses. Now this policy of theirs is put to the test when one day they're challenged to a game of chess by a mysterious individual, who later turns out to be Tet, the god of Discord, a world completely different from ours. As per usual, Sora and Shiro end up winning, and Tet, in a fit of rage and admiration, summons them to Discord. He explains to them that Discord is a world free of crime, war, and just general violence. It's a world where everything from small arguments to land ownership to getting into the title of mother-loving god is decided by games. Now, Discord is home to many different races, ranging from elves to therianthropes to angels to dragons and many more, all of whom unfortunately are superior to the human race in Discord. Witnessing this, Sora and Shiro decide to take it upon themselves to bring on the entirety of the human race along in their quest for world domination. Now from the plot summary alone, you guys can pretty much tell that this anime is not one to be taken seriously. From the very first episode, it is painfully obvious that Blank is always going to stay true to their policy. They will never lose. Now, while to some this level of predictability may seem like it's going to end up being the show's biggest downfall, it actually turns out to be the show's biggest strength, because the fun of the show lies not in seeing how the characters are going to grow from their first ever loss, but seeing how badass our characters can look on their path to victory. The characters of the show are both the best and worst parts of it. They're great in the sense that most of the characters are very enjoyable to watch, but terrible in the sense that they lack any kind of development. Even the main characters fall victim to this, seeing as how from episode 1 to 12, Sora and Shiro never change, regardless of how many life-changing situations they go through. And boy, let me tell you, they go through a lot of life-changing situations. Sora is an arrogant, rude, and just a general badass who is the farthest from the typical main character model one can get. Watching him create and execute his plans that will help him overcome superior races make for some of the best scenes in the show. He's a very enjoyable character to watch, and he's worthy of being a main character. But Shiro is the exact opposite. Shiro is an 11-year-old genius who's capable of calculating things at the rate of a computer. But that ends up being her biggest downfall because that's exactly what she acts like. A computer. She always has this expressionless face and she never speaks. When she does, it makes her worse. She speaks in this monotone and almost lifeless voice that makes her very boring to listen to. Even though I don't understand Japanese, going from Sora's arrogant and rude voice to Shiro's monotone one is just boring, for a lack of a better term. Now this problem for me wouldn't exist if Shiro was a side character, as the small amount of screen time she would get would make her bearable. However, as a main character she's in most of the scenes, which makes me dislike her more and more. Aside from these two, the only other noteworthy character is Stephanie Dora, or Steph for short. She exists for two reasons, and two reasons only: fan service, and to make sure that the viewers don't feel lost. Sora and Shiro are always in the midst of creating new plans to overcome a new challenge. Since they have little to no monologues on the show, the writers need to make sure the viewers know what the heck was going on. So they made Steph the idiot willing to ask questions. While I'm not personally a fan of these types of characters, I can definitely see why the writers needed to put a character like her in the show. Now, aside from these three, everyone else of the show can pretty much be ignored, seeing as how the show treats them as tools to make our main characters look even more badass. Now, if this anime were meant to tell a gripping story with compelling characters that just feel real, I would be enraged at this point. However, since the point of the show was to entertain and not to tell a tale, I can let it slide. Moving on. Now, as I mentioned previously, the animation for the show was done by Madhouse Studios. These are the guys that animated shows like Death Note, High School of the Dead, Hunter x Hunter, the list goes on. Point is, these guys make some great stuff. And No Game No Life is no exception. The animation for the show is very, very fluid, and the backgrounds are mesmerizing. The entire show has this sort of pink overlay that really enhanced the playful nature that this show has. I really did love the animation for the show, especially how they use the environment to enhance the mood. Now, this concept has a very strong presence in episode 9, where in order to illustrate our character's desperate mind state, the animators decided to animate the first half of the show in black and white. That kind of use of environment really did paint a picture of depression in my mind, and I feel like the animators did a great job on that. Kudos to them. I feel like I should stop singing praise of the animation right now, but it was just so awesome. I loved it. Unfortunately, I can't say the same for the music of the show. Now, the music for the show was composed by Shinji Hosoe. I think I got that name right. This guy's actually more well known for composing the sound for video games, not anime. He's worked on a few Tekken games and a Street Fighter game back in like 1996, I think. If I'm not mistaken, this was the first time he worked on the soundtrack for an anime, which would explain why the soundtrack was mediocre at best. Now, don't get me wrong, the music for the show got the job done. Like, the tracks that were being played suit the scenes that were being played at, but they weren't outstanding. None of the tracks were good enough for me to go out of my way to buy. I do have to give a shout out to the opening, though. It was my personal favorite of the tracks. While it still wasn't outstanding, it was the best mediocre could be. Anyways, moving on to the final verdict. Now, one of my most favorite things about the show is how it handles itself. No Game No Life is an ecchi show, but unlike most other ecchi shows, No Game No Life knows when to separate fan service from plot progression, something which I have to commend it for. Now, one of my least favorite things about the show was how the show handled its characters. Well, yes, from the very first episode, they make it very obvious that the show was meant for fun and not to tell a gripping story. I would have really liked it if they could have given their characters a bit more depth. For crying out loud, we don't know why Sora and Shiro hate their world. We're told time and time again that Sora and Shiro hate the real world, but we are never told why. There's a hint of them having a bad childhood, but that's in the ending sequence. For crying out loud, No Game No Life, give us a reason. Another thing I disliked about the show was its ending. The show ends on a damn cliffhanger with no second season in sight. It's almost as if the show was created in an attempt to promote the light novels, which if it's the case, I want to slap the animators across the face because I have no way of reading light novels. Now that I've gotten all of that off my chest, what did I think of the show? I liked it. I thought it was a fun and entertaining piece of anime that I would recommend to people that are willing to sit down for 4.5 hours and just have some fun with the show. But if you're one of those people that are always looking for stories like Death Note, Fate Zero, Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood, then I suggest you stay a million miles away from the show because you are not getting it from No Game No Life. If my words on the show have intrigued you enough to go watch it yourself, the show is available for legal streaming on Crunchyroll, Hulu, and Hanabi. I repeat, legal streaming. I'll leave a link to all those 3 websites in the description, so click away and watch if you want to. And if you're anything like me, after having finished watching a show that you kind of liked, you want an experience that's very similar to it, but you don't necessarily want to rewatch the show. So you start Googling for shows to match that experience that you just had, but sometimes you may not be able to find them. If that's the case, you dedicate an hour of your daily life to sitting in a corner and crying. I still do that because I've yet to find a suitable replacement for Ping Pong the Animation. But luckily, No Game No Life is not like that, as a show called Monaji Tachigai Segai Karakoru Shou Desu Yo that aired last year is very, very similar. You'll know what I'm talking about when you've watched the first episode. But anyways, with all of that being said, I bid thy farewell.